Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have esteemed guests, Woody Zuill and Kevin Meadows. And we're going to talk through, the announcement and celebration of the second edition of the Mob Programming book coming out. And we'll go over the genesis of the story of the first book and the second edition, and changes in the second edition. So can I have you guys introduce yourselves just for the audience members that don't know who you are, and we'll go from there.
Kevin, you want to go first?
Sure. My name's Kevin Meadows. I've been a software engineer since far too long to admit to, and have worked on and off through the years through all kind of different software environments, from small startups with 2 or 3 people to large enterprise outfits. I've been working with Woody since the 90s, I think, and have been collaborating with him ever since, and decided to get together and do this book.
Yeah, and I'm Woody Zuill. I've been doing software development since, well, it's now 40 plus years. And I first learned at BASIC, so that's how I started. I really love software development. I think of myself as a software developer and sort of an accidental speaker on software development topics. So that's it. I really have enjoyed working with teams, and a long time ago realized that teamwork is important, but that we get put on teams in software development, but we rarely do anything that I would call teamwork. So that's sort of my story, and why mob programming exists, I think, is because this long pursuit I had to figure out, well, how can we work as a team? And so there we go.
All right. Well, maybe we can jump in and get a little bit about how the first edition of the book started. What was the genesis story?
Well, I think that's a good one for me to cover. When I first started doing workshops in 2013, my first request for a workshop was in 2013, happened to be in Sweden. And so I went to do it, and I didn't know how to do a workshop, so I quickly figured out, well, what am I going to do during this workshop? But it was very much like a coding dojo, which I'd been doing a lot of. So we started with that, and it seemed to help them quite a bit, and that's what I did. And so then as I did a few more of these workshops from 2013 to, say, 2015, it became clear to me that I need to write a lot of this stuff down, because a one-day workshop, it's enough for me to say a lot of stuff, but I didn't have any materials to give to people. So I started writing this stuff down. And somewhere along the way, so that I kind of knew I need to do that. Matter of fact, I think as a group, all of us working together who kind of originated this, we had talked about, what do we need to do to help? We took it seriously that people were asking about this. And so we gathered, stuff together, and that turned into some original articles that we all wrote. Chris, you wrote a few of those. I wrote a few of them. I think Dexter and Aaron and maybe others. And that's about it. Then one day I got an email from Kevin, and I think we'd already been talking about this stuff. And he had said, well, I took some information that came from the research done in pair programming and just expanded it to what would it need to look like if we were to have more than 2 people sitting at one computer. What would we need to get in a return to see this be economically feasible? And so I read that paper. It was clear to me that it was way beyond the kind of stuff I myself could write. And Kevin's got pretty much in some ways an academic background. He actually went to a college and actually got degrees, which I haven't done. And so I said, I'm trying to write this book. Would you join me? At least that's my remembrance of it. And he started helping me. It's kind of one of those things, like, if you can't motivate yourself to do something, ask someone to join you. And then you're kind of forcing yourself to do it without having to become motivated. And so that's that. That's so that it was just to capture the stuff I was trying to cover in the workshop in a written form. And we put it in, there's this online publishing group called Lean Pub, where you can write a book, publish it immediately, write it. People can access it while you're writing it. They can, give you ideas if you want them, and so on. So that's what we did. Does that sound about right, Kevin?
Yeah, that sounds about how things went. I'm trying to think when we first published the first edition was what, 2014, I think. Is that right?
I probably started in with that about then. Exactly when you joined, I'm not sure, but I think we got to where it was really available in 2016. I don't know when we finished it though, when we called it finished.
Yeah.
Do you have a date for that? Or Chris, do you know?
2016, I think.
Okay.
I do have a question. So because I think probably a lot of our viewers may have considered writing books on LeanPub or something before. How was that experience? Like, what did you get feedback from people as you were writing it? Did you change things along the way? You know, how did LeanPub work for you? I think that might be interesting.
We did. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't recall us getting a lot of feedback on it, but the publishing experience itself was excellent.
Okay.
I don't want to sound like a shill for them, but they made it very easy to be able to input very small bits of the book and then continually write more and continually update. So it was a very good publishing experience.
Yeah, it's painless. If they use a markup, you have to kind of learn at least a little bit about the markup, but or it's really not called a markup. They have is it marked down? There's some kind of a term.
Mark up, mark down, mark left.
So there's like there's a little bit different meaning between the two, but that's pretty straightforward. And anybody who's done a little bit of programming won't have a trouble with it. And there's a lot of stuff that's been published there that wasn't done by programmers, so I don't think you have to be that technical. Mm-hmm. All I care about is can I get it to look halfway decent, you know.
And was the when you did publish it and things like that, did that just kind of feed into the second edition? Did you start a new edition, that sort of thing?
Well, and maybe Kevin, you should kind of
or maybe we just go to the genesis story of the second. How did we get to
that's what this is? That's what this is.
This is the genesis of the second edition. But yeah, we looked at what we had done in the first edition and realized that, you know, in the time since the book was published, there was a lot more we wanted to cover. Specifically, we wanted to bring in the concept of teams, because we didn't really touch very heavily on that in the first edition. And we also wanted to bring in what I think is kind of the core of the second edition of the book, which is the focus on flow. And we've also brought in a chapter on some remote mob programming, because when we had done the first edition, this was obviously prior to the pandemic, and most people were still working on site at the time. So we wanted to update that as well.
Nice. Yeah, so it was just new stuff, and it just seemed inappropriate to put it into the original book by that time, because we had called that one done. And so we, you know, in all fairness, I was never really satisfied. I'm not a writer. I want to really get really clear. I know how to write words, and I kind of know how to form sentences, but beyond that, I'm not a writer. And so I wasn't never really happy with it. It's kind of like I'm never happy if I listen to a recording of my voice or watch a recording of me on at a conference talking. It's like, oh, that guy he's terrible. So I felt it'd be good if we could revisit some of the things we wrote that I felt weren't very clear. And I wanted to, somewhere near the end of the process, I wanted to introduce the idea of teaming and the concept of software teaming. And hopefully we'll have time to cover that here right now, because I think we changed the name of the book from mob programming to software teaming. And I'm not trying to change that for the world. That's just the way I think about it. So originally, I hope you all remember, people would often ask, about the name mob programming, and it was sort of an accidental thing that it became mob programming in the first place, because I wanted to call it whole team programming, because that's how I envisioned it. And that became clearer as the years went by. 2 or 3 years after we started working this way, it was clear to me that we need the whole brain there, which is made up of many different people. So we need one brain made up of many different people, so we can really be effective in writing software. So that was sort of a last step in this. It wasn't that we started thinking we need a new name for the book, but I discussed it with Kevin that I felt there was a name I'd rather use. And I'm going to turn around to my bookshelf. It's usually here, and it sure is. I love to just be able to reach in for this book. That's where the name came from, Teaming. This book came out about a year after we started mob programming. And as soon as it came out, I believe my recollection is I was going to take a flight somewhere, and I saw the notice that this had become available. I bought it and read it on that flight. When I got off the plane, I'd finished the book. I got it in a Kindle or whatever. And so it wasn't that long of a flight, but let's say 5 hours of flying. And I thought, dang, this is what we're talking about. This is what mob programming is about, the concept of dynamic teams that understand that they are here to work as a team. So we need to get good at being a team member. And I came up with a little thought for myself, which was basically this: teamwork isn't the work you get from a team. Teamwork is what we bring to a team, that we're willing to work as a team, that I'm here not to promote my agenda, but I'm here to learn, how can I best contribute to this team effort? And every day, when Chris, you and I worked, every day in the morning I come in, I had a little reminder. You're here, I'm here to bring my best to this team. Keep that in mind. And of course, that never really worked very well, but that's what I would forget that by the end of the day. But that's why software teaming, the idea that it's dynamic, that you will gather the people you need for this effort, keep the team together, of course, as long as possible, and it might be for years. The core team might be together for years, but we'll take this idea of teaming, that we're actively and dynamically going to operate as a team. That's why the new name. There's another reason I guess I better bring up. I was never completely happy with the mob programming as a name. It was a comical name. It was meant to be funny. And that some people, in some countries, mobbing means to bully. And so even when I first became aware of that back in 2013, I would always say this: I don't really care what you call it. Find the name that works for you. And this just happens to be what we had called it. And we didn't even really call it that way. I think it became the default thing to call it because people had heard the term. We didn't invent the term. And
there was like pair plus plus and other ideas that were thrown around. And we didn't have it was, I think somebody was there that said, hey, you should have a name for this at some point.
Yeah. And I won't name names on our original team, but one of the team members who doesn't happen to be here today said, I really like mob programming. Let's just keep calling it that. And so, so that's, and I will always defer to the team itself. If somebody expresses their intent and nobody says, no, that won't work, then we probably should just adopt it and that's like stepping up to be a leader at the moment. The leadership is needed. You're contributing with your intent, and you're not saying we must do this, but the rest of the team can decide. But that's a good point. I think that, I liked the humor of the word mob programming, and I liked that it got a lot of attention. And we never intended for that, but
yeah. So and I actually want to dive into the naming and software teaming a little bit more.
Sure.
And I also noticed that in the new book cover, the main title is software teaming, but then it has like an homage or cameo for mob programming there. It says a mob programming whole team approach, right? So still got it in there a little bit.
We don't want to completely separate, because it's known as mob programming and has been for 12 years, I guess.
Right.
Now.
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
and we're not trying to change the name. I want to make that clear. This is how I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It's not how I expect the world to think.
Well, I think too that the name software teaming better captures the essence of what we're doing.
That's right.
The name mob programming implies, however, indirectly, that we're programming. And that's not what we're always doing. We're oftentimes trying to hash out what needs to be done. We're oftentimes trying to hash out which story to do next. We're trying to hash out the details of a story, what it is the customer wants. We may be working with people that aren't programmers.
Yeah.
And so it's not like we're at all times a continuous conveyor belt of code going into the computer. So I think the idea that we're constructing software using a team better captures what we're actually doing.
That's right. That's right.
Nice, nice, right on. And I think what I wanted to ask about it was, naming things is tough. I've always learned that with code from the beginning. Like, what do we name this variable? Oh man, maybe I can think of a slightly better name or whatever. But it's always that's one thing that I love doing as a team is naming a variable and things like that. And so it's always fun being part of the naming process. But I'd like to hear more about this like teaming concept, because it's interesting to me, because you see this happen a lot. Any place that's trying out whatever we want to call this thing, that you'll see this, maybe they'll use a new name, they come up with their new name, or they'll use Mob, or they use Ensemble or something else. And then they try to come up with a new name, so they know like, hey, I know we've been calling ourselves a team or a squad or something, but we're doing something different. And so they use a different name. And then I've also seen people use an existing name, but try to bring in a new meaning to it than what was done before. So maybe what was the thinking behind the strategy? Because obviously teaming is something that gets used, I don't know, in 20 different ways, depending who you're talking to and what context.
Well, just to be clear, that's from this description of teaming.
That description right there. Okay,
Yeah.
very cool.
Which is basically that it's being used as a verb, I think, in this way when we're teaming, and that stuck with me since I read it. I think I've read this book twice. Matter of fact, Amy Edmondson, who wrote this, was going to be our keynote speaker at the 2020 Mob Programming Conference, which we canceled due to the pandemic, travel issues and all that. So the concept of teaming there really is, we need to be able to really up our skills on working as a team, and we bring that to the team. So maybe we get rid of the forming and norming chunks of things. If I've got to go work with this team, I'm going to bring my best team capability to it, and I'm going to immediately be able to contribute. We will remember, Chris and I, somebody flew in from Winnipeg once. When in our earlier days, we would say, hey, people call us or send an email. Hey, I want to learn about mob programming. What do you do? You just come and be with us. So at first, we weren't doing workshops or talks or anything. Just, why don't you come be with us? So he came in, sat down with us. Within 10 minutes, he was contributing how to better do lambdas in C#, which was a relatively new team. The team was doing quite a bit with. This person was giving value immediately. And I at the end of the day, I think we had worked on the one that we were looking at right then. As a matter of fact, he said something like, "Oh, there's some really cool things we could do with this, a lot better than this. So show us." And so he stepped us through. So he's contributing as a navigator, the person guiding the process, practically when he first sat down with the team. That's my memory of it anyway. By the end of the day, though, he had seen maybe 10, 15, 20 of these lambdas we'd done over the last month, and helped us make them better. So he got a good understanding of what were we doing, because that's where you're gathering data and filtering it and all this stuff. So you're going to onboard under the purpose of the team super quick. And that I remember that incident, and I recount it often because people ask, well, how do you onboard somebody to this? Well, if they're willing to work with a team. So this is teaming. He came in ready to contribute. I didn't even know he was a programmer. I just thought he was, somebody who was interested. Who was it? We had a bunch of what I would consider luminaries visit us in some of those earlier years, and I just thought, here's somebody from another part of the world that was just interested. That maybe they were an agile expert of some kind, but here he turned out to be, I think, a really brilliant programmer, and we learned a lot from him that day. At least that's my recollection of it.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of a story that we talk about this in the book. But this would have been, I don't remember what year it was, but Chris, Hugh, and Woody and the team had literally just started mob programming, and he hadn't been doing it for very long. And Woody called me and said, "Hey, I want you to come see what we're doing." And so I went there, and this was within, I guess, the first 5 or 10 minutes. I sat down with a group, and I had always considered myself a spreadsheet expert because I've been working with spreadsheets literally since the days of Lotus 1-2-3 on a DOS machine. I mean, way back when. And I'd use them all throughout my college experiences. And so I thought I knew just about everything there was to know, every possible shortcut, everything you could know to make your work go faster. And literally within the first, like I said, 10 minutes of sitting down, we were doing something with a spreadsheet. And somebody showed me a shortcut that I never knew existed. And this is literally after decades of doing this stuff. Within 10 minutes, I learned something new. And that is the moment I realized there's a lot of power in this approach to crafting software. A lot, because I get to experience the cognitive ability of everyone on the team, not just me. And I think of all the times that I started in a new company somewhere and I had to onboard. That's always a slow and difficult process. And I realized right then that morning that if I was a new programmer starting there, that by the end of the day, I would be contributing to the team.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
That's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. And it's, kind of being in that environment since then, reteamed now myself to different products and teams, I don't know, 5-6 times in 4 years. And we still do the visiting. So every twice a month, we have someone come in from anywhere around the world remotely. And it's that same experience. Like they're immediately contributing whatever, nugget or specialty they have. And so it's really, really fun. Okay, that helps explain a lot with the kind of the concept of teaming, be like, hey, let's maybe go start teaming. I had kind of going back to the writing process. I had a specific question. So you both wrote the book together. What was that experience like? And maybe starting with you, Kevin, like, how was the collaboration, I suppose?
It was wonderful, actually. I found that what Woody and I do, I guess you'd call it pair programming or pair writing, since there were only two of us, but someone would have an idea or a thought about what we wanted to talk about next, and they would just run with it. And the other person would actually be the driver typing it into the keyboard. And this would switch back and forth and back and forth. I would get an idea and I would run with it and expound on it, and Woody would type it in. And as he's typing it in, that would trigger something in him. And then he would get an idea and start kind of dictating to me, navigating to me. And then I would take over the keyboard and start putting in what he was talking about. And I think it was that interplay, that feedback, to be able to bounce ideas off of one another, that not only are we contributing individual ideas, but we're also triggering ideas in the other person that we didn't realize we had. And those ideas, in turn trigger back to us. So it's, it's kind of this chicken and egg thing going back and forth.
Yeah, I love that. So I feel the same experience. So Kevin thinks Kevin's brain works differently than mine. So when we bring them together, we get a bigger brain than we would ever get alone. And, there's a couple guys, everybody will know who they are, but I might mention their names, who expressed me this concept they call the one. And to me, what they said was, when you write software that you are going to use, nobody else in the world will ever use it. You're writing it for yourself. You are the ideal person. You're the coder. You're the user. You're kind of all the parts of this thing. And that's how the first 15 years of me programming was. I was writing software I would use because I couldn't buy the software I wanted. And when I could, it was usually really terrible. So I needed to write my own software. When you're working with a pair, writing like this, working with a team, whatever it happens to be, we get to take advantage of this concept of that one. Everything is there in one person's brain, but it no longer is. But if we bring all those brains together, we get this team that can act, because I can communicate really quickly with myself, right? It's sort of more than instantaneous. I don't even know how exactly it all works. I'm trying to study that right now. But when we're doing it with other people, I want to get as close to that as possible. So where my ideas can be stifled or stagnate if it's just me. When I'm working with someone else, the ideas grow. And this really helps us move forward. It's like the old idea of, I think they call it incubating an idea. And in this case, that incubation process becomes shorter because we're getting instant feedback that our brain may need to work on it ourselves for a long time. So bringing that back to the writing, we could just bounce things back and forth really quickly, and we would end up actually having to make lists like a parking lot of the things we might want to cover later, because the ideas were flowing so quickly this way. And I hope people find that works for them in mob programming as well.
Yeah.
Or software teaming. You have to be careful with that name, software teaming.
Yeah.
So
We can call it whatever we want to.
yeah, call it whatever you want.
Well, we mentioned this.
I never meant. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say we mentioned this in the book. To Woody's point about, when you're working individually, you're limited by the cognitive capacity of the individual person. And the term we use in the book when you're working in a group is the cognitive collective. And in my view, it's not just one person's cognitive ability added to the next person's and added to the next person. I don't think it's just additive. I think it's actually multiplicative.
Yeah.
Because I think that each person's ideas spark ideas in everyone else. And those ideas in turn feed back into the group. So it's kind of this self-reinforcing idea generation. And that's why I believe it's more multiplicative than additive. So I think we get a lot out of working in a group. And that's where we came up with the term cognitive collective.
Nice.
Seems like a good candidate for a causal loop diagram, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so when I work with someone else, doing almost anything I've done in my life where we were working as a team, the results are, it's the old system thinking. The results aren't the adding together of the results that of each individual. It's the multiplying we can get. And like if I go to help a friend move, and when I was younger, I always had a pickup truck, which meant if someone was moving, I might get invited to help them move. So if we go in to move the couch, we don't go, how do we break this up so each individual can move their own piece? We don't get a chainsaw and cut the couch apart. Together we move the couch. But that is a type of teamwork that does require that we're very attentive to each other. So if we're going down the stairs and the person, particularly the one below, says, set it down, set it down, set it down, you're going to repeat it quickly. Like their intent is, this is good. I'm going to drop it and I'm going to get crushed. Let's please put it down. And so this kind of ability to collaborate well under that kind of a situation is something we kind of naturally do in a way. So that's the kind of everything I've ever done. When I was young and I played music with a group, I had the same experience. As a matter of fact, the only reason, I got to be really careful saying only, but the main reason that coding dojos became something that I wanted to do a lot of when I was first introduced to the idea of a coding dojo, because it reminded me a lot of playing music in a band in the days when I was younger. It's like all the same feelings of collaboration, of letting someone else bring their idea forward, of following up and supporting that idea, even if I didn't quite get it yet. Like, I'm going to see us come to the finish of that, or the other person could say, yeah, this isn't going to work. That's up to them. But if they want to try something, I'm going to become an instant supporter and follower of whatever it is they want to do. And that reminded me a lot of playing music, both in rock bands when I was really young and later in folk music bands when I got a little bit older, into my advanced teens. And so it's like this feeling of people contributing, and we pick up on it and we run with it. It's a kind of, they talk about this with improvisation also, like improv comedy. It's like if we deny the idea that was just brought forward, we're just going to kill everything. And we got to just accept it. Yes, anding. Yep. Exactly. Yep. This is important with teamwork. Everybody's got to be a leader and a follower continuously, almost, every individual has to be ready to lead when it's appropriate for them to lead, and the rest of the team to follow at that moment. And this is important also about the concept of intent. So if I express my intent and Kevin doesn't pick up on it, we're going to drop the ball on something. So we were paying enough attention to each other to hear the ideas and say, yeah, let's run with it. Hopefully that's useful to people.
Yeah. I mean, to hopefully not get too metaphysical, but in a way, when you're teaming or mobbing, you have the unity and diversity all interplaying at the same time, kind of
That's
like
right.
that improv jazz band. And
That's right.
I like that. I've heard people use that analogy before. I think it's really good. One thing I also noticed about the second edition is you have a foreword by Kent Beck. What's the story there?
Yeah, so let's go back to 1999, and I got my first really great introduction to extreme programming. Yeah. That's this guy, Kent Beck. So I can't say too much about that. I would love to just let's put this under the, everybody who becomes a programmer gets a copy of this book. This is the first edition of the Extreme Programming book. There's a second edition, which I also liked, but this one had the little his little thing where he talks about how did extreme programming become. And he says, we had all these practices. I knew they were good because they were working for us. What would it be like if we turned up the good on all these things? And he imagined a console or mixing board, which was really easy for me to identify with. Like, here's this thing. So a mixing board for music, microphones and instruments, whatnot. That's there not to make everybody the loudest they can be. It's to make everybody balanced, so we get the right end result. Well, that's how I took it. And from that, I took the idea of turn up the good, because that's basically what he's saying. He said, what if we just turn every knob up to 10? Now, in the book, he says up to 10, but I hear people quoting him as saying up to 11, which he might have been thinking, but the book definitely says up to 10. So everyone who's watched Spinal Tap will know that's an important concept. Yeah. So, but to get to the point, Kent Beck is somebody I've been following since I first read this book, pre all social media that I was ever involved in. And so I met him at a conference and we talked about stuff. Turns out we had a lot in common. And so we've stayed in touch. And as we were thinking about, there's several people I would like to have written a foreword, but he was the top of the list. So I thought, well, I'll just send him a note. And he said, sure, I would love to. And if you understand what he's saying there, he's not really endorsing anything about what we did or what we're saying, I don't think. He's just kind of saying, that because a lot of people will say, well, isn't this just like pair programming? It's like, it's exactly like pair programming. It's like, it's just expanding it slightly. It's a slight step beyond. So that's that. Kent's a wonderful guy. Yeah, turn up to 11. That's right. We finally get that 11 here. And I'd like to see what the next thing is. Like pair programming, mob programming, or software teaming. What might there be? If we stop with what we have, we're going to end up, stagnating. I used that word before. I think that's what happens. If we just do what's here, mob programming in a way, or software teaming, began for me shortly after I learned pair programming, because I was working on a thing, well, a few years later, but not many, where it seemed like it'd be an advantage to have the product owner, which we call the business analyst, and the tester sitting together with a developer like me, because otherwise I had to read reams of documents. I mean, just literally all kinds of documents to just get to the heart of some bug fix or something. So when we got three of us together, the business analyst knew what they wanted the thing to do. The tester knew what was wrong, where we could discover what was wrong, and that they could guide me to where in the code we needed to go almost instantly. So where it could have taken a day or two just to understand a particular bug we were going to fix, we can now do it in minutes. So that started, quite a while back. And as it grew, we started doing refactorings this way with 5 or 6 people back in 2006 or 7. An old-time co-worker of ours, Jason Kearney, will remember the stories of us refactoring with a group of 5 or 6 people. And it was always a brain made up of all these different points of view, made from different ideas about how things could be. And we would navigate and just say, let's try this, let's try that. And somebody would be at the keyboard doing it. And that eventually grew, I guess, 5 years later into mob programming. The exact connections there aren't really clear to me, but by the time we started doing mob programming, I had almost 10 years of experience trying to work with more than 2 people at one computer.
Nice.
Well, I was always struck by all the years of my software engineering career, where everywhere I ever worked, there were always admonitions for teamwork. There were posters in the hallway that, showed somebody reaching down to pull somebody up the cliff, and the importance of being on a team, and, there's no I in team, and how we're all in this as a team together. And yet I was always struck that we do very little work that I think you could truly consider to be a team. And we make this analogy in the book where if you go to the orchestra, say you go to the symphony and there's an orchestra playing, you don't see just one individual person sitting there and playing their part, and then when it comes time for the next instrument to play, they have to go find that person because that person's busily engaged with something else to make sure they're getting their money's worth from them. And the music stops, they get the person, they have to tell the person, now, we're right here, so look it up on the music sheet, and then they find it and they play it, and then as soon as they're done with their part, they then go backstage. And it would be a start-stop affair that no one would rightly want to attend. But what if you notice carefully is that you'll see that as the music moves along, there are long periods where different musicians don't play anything at all.
Mm.
They sit there completely just following on along, observing where they are. But when the time comes that they're needed, they're instantly available right then and there, so that the music keeps flowing. It never has to stop and start again. And so I was always struck, in the corporate world, why we don't do more of that. Why do we separate the people that really should be working together? And I think it comes down to a focus on the belief that we have to keep our expensive programmers busy at all times, or we're not getting our money's worth out of them. And in so doing, we are unable to see the cost of the delay associated with having to coordinate people's work. What happens when somebody gets blocked? How long do they have to wait before they're unblocked? And that's a pretty significant expense.
All the context switching.
Yeah, I was always struck by, we aren't doing what I would really consider teamwork. And then that's when I first came up to Hunter, Woody, with you and Chris, and I saw, oh, this is teamwork. The work is always moving toward the customer. It's never blocked, it's never stopped. It's always moving toward the customer. And once it's in the customer's hands, we're getting money for it.
Nice. Yeah, that reminds me of some of my first experiences mobbing. Is it almost felt like music was playing because we were accomplishing so much so quickly that I was like, what is going on? Like, we're releasing to production. Wait, it's only been a couple hours, and it also gives me, maybe I'll get feedback to the next concert I go to be like, hey, you could be way more resource efficient if you only paid that band member the times he's needed, so.
Yeah, we're going to have a dance. So we can't afford to have everybody here for the full 4 hours. So for the first hour, we'll have the drummer. And for the second hour, we'll have the bass player. And for the third hour, we'll have the lead singer. We're not going to do that. So that's, I think, where the concept kind of an ensemble comes in, is these people provide what we want, but we have to have them all. It's kind of part of it. I will say this, though, is that there's no reason that all of our work has to be done as a group. It's just that when it's appropriate to be a group, we probably should be capable of that. In other words, accomplished at working as, that's where the teaming idea comes in, is that if we can work well as a team when we need to work as a team, but I would never insist that somebody has to work as a team. They can, if they feel that they want to go think alone, go think alone. Now, from my own life experience, I have experienced it over and over again that in a dialogue or a conversation with someone, I can be focused and thinking about a specific thing for a much longer period of time. So that's something that I think research is starting to show, is that humans are actually maybe well geared up for conversation and dialogue. And we'll find a lot of writings that go back, thousands of years, I guess, to the Greek and maybe Roman writings of philosophy and so on. It's often written in sort of a dialogue manner. And I think dialogue gives us a way to bring forward our ideas that we couldn't if we didn't do the dialogue. Not everybody's the same. That's just one condition that some people might have, but I've noticed for myself. I have an older brother who used to call me up and he'd say, "Hey, there's something I want to talk with you about, but you don't need to listen." Can you think about that for a moment? But you need to listen, because he knew that if he had someone else to explain it to, it would have forced to say the things. That's maybe I was the rubber duck. Is that the rubber duck thing? Maybe I was the rubber duck model. So I would usually listen to him because I would always learn something, but you get the picture. It's like having to form the sentences is part of the thinking process. And there's actually a lot of people who do that. I've read about that, about individuals, like they'll imagine they're talking with Abraham Lincoln. For those of you who don't know, that used to be one of the presidents of the United States before I was born. But, just think of somebody that you admire, that you can have the conversation with. I've actually been book somewhere saying, here's a technique you use.
Nice.
Yeah, I wish I could count the number of times where I had spent hours trying to solve some difficult, complex problem in programming, some logic thing. And finally, I just, in disgust, give up and go to the person next to me and go, "Have you ever seen a situation where, oh, never mind, I got it." It's just the idea of, having to try to explain it to somebody else.
That's brilliant.
Automatically makes me think twice about what I need to do and gets the problem solved.
But whenever I tell people that I've been talking to Abraham Lincoln, they all look at me like I'm crazy. So I don't know.
Chris, they look at me like I'm crazy no matter what. So I don't even have to say anything. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, we're coming up on time. I'd actually love to keep going because I'd like to hear more about Chris's Abraham Lincoln conversations. And actually, I'm a philosophy nerd on the side, so I would love to sometime dive deep into the classic dialogues and how that's like mobbing. But we are coming up on time. I'll give you an opportunity for both of you to share, but I had one very practical question because it's something I'm dealing with at this moment. I am a good deal way through the first edition reading it, and now there's a second edition. What advice do you have for me? Do I abandon the first and go straight to the second, or finish the first and then?
That's a good question.
Oh, I never considered that somebody would have picked up our first edition and not just immediately read it cover to cover. That seems absurd.
Yeah, I know. Lazy person. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how I read books. That's
this I would suggest starting in on the second edition.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because there's considerable new material in it, and the existing material has been considerably refactored. So I think you might get more out of the second edition than you would the first. The only difference is if you're a math and numbers nerd like me, you may want to read the financial analysis section in the first edition. That got cut down to size and simplified for the second edition. But it's quite involved in the first edition. The second edition is much more readable.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, before we close out, anything y'all like to share, or plug before we close out, starting with you, Woody, and then going to Kevin?
Well, for one thing, I'm going to plan my 2023, and I've got a few conferences I'm going to. If you've got a conference that you'd like to have this subject covered, or any of the subjects I talk about, it's mostly about teaming, but I also have the beyond estimates concept and a few other things that I share. But looking for the engagements I'm going to have. I already have some stuff. I think I'm going to be in the UK, and matter of fact, I'm pretty certain in May, and then probably I think I'm going to India in March, and I'm going to be back in maybe September or October. But anyway, so I'm looking for whatever I'm going to do this year, and I'm always open to doing workshops remotely, or now I've been going to do them co-located, so I'm looking for that. But if there's ever any question or anything you want to know, just reach out, and I'll try to help any way I can. My goal isn't to get more work. My goal is to help anybody who's interested in learning to work well together, find a way to move along that path. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and people to reach out to you, what would be your recommended way?
The easiest thing is to go to Twitter, if it still exists, or LinkedIn. And so either of those will work for me. That's the easiest thing, because that's, I check that moment by moment, like probably, yeah.
How about you, Kevin? Anything to share or plug before we close?
Yeah, just a brief note in case it wasn't clear. The first edition of the book is still on LeanPub, but it's been what's called retired. So you can't purchase a new copy, but if you purchased an original copy, you can still download it. And the second edition is now up on Amazon, not LeanPub.
Cool.
That's right. We should have made that clear.
Yeah.
We did. People could easily get a paperback version, whereas the original book was just electronic form. So.
Nice.
Great.
Fun. Well, thank you so much, Kevin and Woody, for being on the show with us today. A lot of fun. I learned a lot of great things. And yeah, so if you were inspired by this episode, yeah, please go get the book and dive on in. And, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the book or anything Woody and Kevin have shared here. Please share this episode with someone you might think will be inspired as well. Yeah, you can reach out to me and Chris on Twitter, LinkedIn, and more, and see the show notes for that. And have a good one, everybody. And I was going to say mob on and have a good one, but maybe mob and team on and have a good one. And talk to y'all later. Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.
Everybody.